Welcome all to another episode of the Dynasty After Party. My name is Michael Sicoli. I'm joined, as always, with Joel Wirth, although we didn't miss you. We missed you last week, Joel. We had Austin fill in, but we got you this time around. Happy to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was travel hell. Like we were talking about before the show, I spent 17 hours either on a plane or in an airport, which should have been a 6-hour trip. So, yeah, appreciate Austin stepping in and kind of suck it to American Airlines. But other than that, I'm glad to be back.
All right, we're starting off with a name drop at the airlines. Everyone, don't fly American.
Yeah, it's going to be fire today. We're going to be on fire tonight.
All right, we'll rip the sponsorship that American was about to send our way. But either way, welcome into everybody for this week's show. Happy to have everyone with us as training camp is near. And I wanted to talk about training camp battles, but we had huge breaking news today that's kind of been alluded to the last few days. DeAndre Hopkins is now a Tennessee Titan. That's kind of been on the wall for a few days now. The sports books changed the odds, and we all saw it coming. But it's a thing now. The spot that we all made fun of months ago is now a reality for DeAndre Hopkins. So without further ado, I want to jump right into DeAndre Hopkins here, Joel. What's the impact here? A lot of people looking at their Traylon Burks shares of drafting early and feeling a little bit scared, but should they?
I'm going to say no. Like we were talking before the show, I think this Tennessee team is being seriously undervalued by the public. Looked on Twitter today and I saw a lot of takes of, DeAndre Hopkins cares more about money than he does about winning. Just because he, didn't sign with the Chiefs or the Bills doesn't mean, he didn't go to a good spot, right? This is a team that if you look at last year, right, even without Ryan Tannehill for like half a dozen games at the end of the year, they still took Jacksonville to a de facto play-in game with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, and they were winning into the second half of that game. So, they're half away from making the playoffs, even without Ryan Tannehill, with the line kind of collapsing, without Taylor Lewan. They've kind of addressed those issues, right? They get Tannehill back. They drafted Skoronski, the kind of consensus best offensive line prospect in the class. They brought in Andre Dillard from Philly, the best offensive line in the league. Like you said, they've got a good coach. They've got a good infrastructure. They've got a offensive identity. They got rid of Todd Downing, who was kind of an active impediment to their offense last year. So,
oh my God, that's going to be such a huge shift.
So, yeah, I think this is not the kind of death sentence for DeAndre Hopkins that people are kind of making it out to be. I still think he's going to be effective. I think he's going to kind of line up, move into the slot. This will kind of push Traylon Burks outside full time. He was outside most of the time last year anyway, but I think this kind of establishes him as their kind of de facto X receiver. If anything, this kind of hurts Chig Okonkwo a little bit, but I don't think anybody was putting him to the elite tier tight ends. So, yeah, I think this is a good spot for him. It's certainly better than New England would have been.
He wasn't in the Chig wasn't in the elite tier of tight ends, but by August his ADP might as well have been there because he's been
he was getting some sleeper steam. So
oh my goodness, like the same sleeper steam we see every year. Then something small happens this is not small, but something changes, and all of a sudden we go back. And I'm agreeing with you. I think he's more of a 2024 guy. He's got the traits that I love to see: the athleticism, the yards per catch, yards after catch. But it's just. We both expect this to be a very narrow passing tree, as you said before the show, about this going to two guys, and that's going to be DeAndre Hopkins. It's going to be Traylon Burks, which is why I'm not as low on Traylon Burks either. He's not going much lower, if at all, in my dynasty ranks when I update them after this show, because we play the long game. DeAndre Hopkins is over the hill. He's still good, but he is well past his prime. He's got a 2-year deal that could easily be 1 year if it doesn't work out, and Traylon Burks is still a very good player and the same talent that you invested in the first place. That talent hasn't changed. And if anything, DeAndre Hopkins opens up the field. So if you look at Ryan Tannehill's, numbers, yeah, he didn't play a lot of games last year, but he still played enough to have a sample size worth talking about. He was fifth in yards per attempt. And while there are other numbers that you don't like to see, he was, not great on interceptable passes, but you focus on the changes that Tennessee's made. You mentioned the offensive line. And you look at the new coordinator. Nobody's talking about Tim Kelly being a big change from Todd Downing here, just because of in-house hire. But he was the passing game coordinator for this Titans team last year. They add DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe we see a slightly more balanced Titans team. Probably not. But even if they jump to that 21st, 22nd in passing attempts, that's going to represent a big enough pie to funnel through two people, at the very least DeAndre Hopkins. So I'm expecting a wide receiver 2 season out of Hopkins. I'm probably closer to wide receiver 3 numbers, flex for Traylon Burks, Could be a lot of ups and downs just based on Derrick Henry's usage. But what are your thoughts on both those two players for this year, as well as we touched on Chig Okonkwo, but Ryan Tannehill's as well?
Yeah, that's Josh Hudson, our founding father here at Club Fantasy, and I are in the same Scott Fishbowl division. And he was trying to get Mac Jones as his second or third quarterback, I guess. And I think he ended up with Ryan Tannehill. And I said, he was kind of upset about it. I said, you're going to be better off with Tannehill. And that was before they signed DeAndre Hopkins. So, yeah, I think Tannehill's pretty seriously underrated. He's got kind of a running floor. I mean, he's really not that different from Daniel Jones, if you think about it, right? He's got that running floor, that kind of sneaky running floor that people don't expect. He's not the cheat code kind of guy, but he's a better runner than people think he is. So I'd much rather have Tannehill than Mac Jones for this year, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And I will push back slightly with the Ryan Tannehill running, because we saw that dip last year and the year before a little bit compared to what it was the years past, because he totally was a cheat code in terms of what we were expecting and what we got. But he did have the foot injury last year. That was kind of definitely impacting his movement in general.
Yeah, the injury is a concern on the running side.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that bounces back. He is, up there in age. I believe he's 34 years old, which is much older than everybody would think when it comes to Tannehill. But he's been around for a while. So I like him as that mid to low end QB2 that is going at QB3 prices right now in drafts and Dynasty left for dead. So, if you
like in Superflex, if he's my third quarterback, I'm really happy with that.
I'm fine. I think it's going to be a very safe year for him, and the matchups you're going to be able to predict, I think you will be able to. In terms of, you're not going to be surprised with what Ryan Tannehill gives you, and you're going to be able to pick and choose the matchups. So let's jump into our Look Inside series. But before we do that, I want to make sure you guys are following Club Fantasy FFL, because that is where all these articles that we're about to talk about are just going up there at clubfantasyffl.com. Amazing breakdowns of each team, 3 teams every week. This week is the Chargers, Ravens, and Vikings. Amazing fantasy offenses and some amazing dynasty talent on them. So be sure to be checking out Club Fantasy FFL on Twitter with that exact handle, as well as ourselves here. A little self-promotion here with Joel here at JDubs, and also myself at Michael__Scully. So let's jump into the Los Angeles Chargers. And Ryan, again, at the Fantasy 5, our lovely Ryan Weiss, talked about Keenan Allen about an hour after I drafted Keenan Allen in the Scott Fishbowl draft. And I won't lie, it gave me some lovely confirmation bias, and I'm very happy and excited for what Keenan Allen can do in 2023. But what about you? And for Dynasty, he's certainly a very tough player to nail down.
Yeah, I think if you can get him at a bargain, I think you look at what he did last year, like he had the worst hamstring injury of all time because of like the first half of the season. But when he came back, the guy was a legit league winner. Like he just tore it up. He had a monster game in week 17. So yeah, if you're a contending team, I'm absolutely going. I would pay a first for him. If I'm a legit championship contender, I would pay a late first for him. He's a guy who's going to. I know the long term value isn't there probably, but he's still getting it done. So if he'd come back last year from the injury and just had kind of some lingering issues and just struggled to get back on the field, I have more concerns. But he came back and he was like a legit top 10 receiver in those in the back half of the season. Yeah, he
ranked 14th in target rate, which was around 28%. Which, factors in targets as well as routes run. So, yeah, when he was out there, he was exactly the Keenan Allen we all knew and love, and he was just getting all the looks because we know how this offense runs through it. And you add Kellen Moore now to this Chargers offense, not Joe Lombardi, and you're going to expect more 3 wide receiver sets. You're going to expect a faster-paced offense. It's a reason why everyone's expecting Justin Herbert to make a significant leap this year. And Keenan Allen has to be a big part of that because he is still the best receiver on this roster by a considerable margin. As much as I love Mike Williams, he's just not available enough. So I'm all in with Keenan Allen as well. Like I said, I drafted him in the Scott Fishbowl because I think he's going to be a first down and PPR machine. But for Dynasty, you mentioned price there. So you're willing to send a late first for him. Is that Superflex, 1 QB, or both?
Both. Yeah. I mean, in a 1 QB, that late first is, what are you getting
much less
first? Yeah. So yeah, even in a super flex, if Keenan Allen's the missing piece to a championship run, that's kind of, we've talked about how I don't like doing straight up 1-for-1 deals, but yeah, I would definitely try to make a package around, but kind of based around Keenan Allen for a late first.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys that is undervalued almost every year, and in Dynasty, very undervalued because he's, again, over that 30-year mark. And there is a real value to guys that just provide you with a wide receiver 1 or high-end wide receiver 2 season for a year. Maybe he drops to wide receiver 3, he falls off the cliff next year, but we play to win the game. And to win the game,
exactly.
you need guys like Keenan Allen. But there's other receivers that I definitely want to be talking about in Los Angeles, so I'm going to pair them up right here. That's Quentin Johnston as well as Mike Williams. One of them is the exciting rookie people are hoping for, and the other one is the tried and true and not reliable at all Mike Williams, who looks amazing on every single play, but also spent half of them on the sideline because of him hurting his shoulder jumping 90 feet in the air. So Mike Williams, I want to start with him because I think he's the biggest. I say big question mark in fantasy a lot, but he really is because of how much time he misses every single year. What are your expectations for him in 2023?
Yeah, so the injuries are obviously a big concern, right? That's kind of the elephant in the room with him. But I mean, if you look at his production, like going into last year, he'd always been like really inefficient. He'd gotten decent targets, but his catch rate was really pretty poor. It was like 55%, really terrible. But last year, he just, in one season just kind of kicked that up to about 66%. So if you can get that kind of, he's another guy. He's had 1,000-yard season with a couple touchdowns, and then he's had 10 touchdowns with like 600 yards. He's never really had that one monster season, but he's got it in him, right? And especially like you talked about with this kind of move to the Kellen Moore offense away from the Joel Lombardi offense, which is very different. Like you said, they're going to run a lot more through wide receiver sets. There should be a lot more downfield passing where he kind of excels. He's kind of a guy that people are just kind of leaving for dead, like you said, just because of the injuries. But if this offense clicks like we kind of expect it to, and he puts it all together, he could have that monster season in him.
Yeah, and he's a very talented player, and he's someone that if the numbers just clicked 1 year, we'd be talking about him akin to Cooper Kupp if Cooper Kupp kept getting hurt, because he had 1,000-yard season early, but he didn't score touchdowns. Then the next season he had 10 touchdowns, but he only had like 750 yards. And then the season after that, he finally played, and it was kind of like a mix of both. And ever since, it's kind of been the hodgepodge of which one are we going to get? Are we going to get a healthy Mike Williams? When are we going to get a healthy one? Can I trust him this week? And then he blanks you, but the next week he puts up 40. So it's been such a weird and wild ride for him, but I'm ultimately with you as well because I, like everyone else, I'm expecting Justin Herbert to make that leap. And again, it doesn't just have to happen through Keenan Allen. I think it's going to happen through Mike Williams because I'm not sure Quentin Johnston's ready for the NFL and everything like that. I think he could have a great impact towards the back end of the year, but I don't think it's going to happen early on. And if it is, it's still not going to hurt Mike Williams because they are such different players despite the lazy comp that gets thrown around to them. Oh my goodness, Joel. Of all the things in the world that piss me off, that is not in the top 10, but I wish it was because it is really, really annoying because they are completely different players. One uses his size almost to a fault, and the other one is a really good rack guy. Quentin Johnston being the rack guy, Mike Williams being the contested catch guy. Just because Quentin Johnston's big doesn't make him a great contested catch guy. So I'm in a Mike Williams. The cost still seems a little bit high for how much risk is associated with him. I haven't found him on many of my mocks, but maybe I have to rethink how I'm valuing him. But long-term outlook, this is Dynasty. We talked about it on no pun intended, about the redraft focus. Dynasty, a year from now, where do you see Mike Williams in the public light? Let's say he has a good season, he has a bad season. What happens?
Yeah, I think is he a free agent after this year, or did he sign a contract?
Let me double check. He might have 1 year left, but it wouldn't be more than that. I'll bet that right now.
Yeah, I think basically if he has a healthy season, he kind of vaults into that wide receiver 2 status. If he gets injured again, if he struggles with injuries again, I think people are just going to leave him for dead.
He is under contract for next season. However, his guaranteed money is all but dried up. They can oh my God. Well, they're going to restructure him because his cap hit is over $32 million next year. And his dead cap is just $12 million. So he's going to be either released or heavily restructured. no matter how good he does, because they are not carrying a $32 million cap hit with Mike Williams into next season. And,
especially with Herbert needing an extension.
Yes, which won't. I don't think it'll kick in next year. They'll have the 5th-year option for that, but even the 5th-year option will still be, a good chunk of change. So, it's gonna be interesting to see how his contract situation plays out, especially since it's somewhat dependent on Keenan Allen because of the money that Keenan Allen is owed. Is Keenan Allen on an expiring deal? I should know that because of how much everyone talked about it in February, but I'll check that right now as well. But about Quentin Johnston though, let's talk about him. What has to happen for him to be actually fantasy relevant? Can he do it with a healthy Mike Williams?
I think if Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are both healthy, then I don't think he does much this year.
Yeah, I tend to be on the same line with that. Also, Keenan Allen is the exact same contract situation. One of them, if not both, bite the dust or face major restructures next year, which, again, good outlook for Quentin Johnston. Long term, I think both of us are expecting not that much for 2023, despite the hype that's starting to build in summer camps and what he might be able to put on showcase in
and if you think about it, the dynasty community is very quick to jump off wide receivers who don't kind of produce in their first year. So if he is kind of that third banana or probably fourth banana when you consider Austin Ekeler, if he's the fourth target in that passing game and he doesn't really produce, his value could take a massive hit between now and next year.
You know who that sounds like right now? Sky Moore. Who I drafted today in another league as well. I won't lie.
I at least expect Johnson to be able to get on the field. So I don't think it should be that bad.
It's not nearly Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are not nearly MVS and Kadarius Toney and the entire room.
A little different there.
Austin's hopping in here to praise our fading of QJ. He loves to see the ADP like that. But either way,
industry's foremost Quentin Johnston fader.
Yeah. Let's talk about Austin Ekeler. You touched on it there. Somebody, came out this week, publicly said not happy with his contract because he's getting paid he's being paid less than these names I tweeted earlier, so I got the names in my head. Less than Cedric Wilson, who you might not even know what team he's on right now. He's getting paid less than Corey Davis. He's getting paid about less than almost half of what Allen Lazard is making this year. It's criminal, the RB market in general, but that's the RB market, and we're not going to expect that to change just because Austin Ekeler has earned his due, which is also crazy because Austin Ekeler has more receiving yards than some of those wide receivers we just named. So either way, Austin Ekeler, Dynasty, where everyone's expecting to have an excellent redraft season. Again, the Chargers taking that leap should only mean good things for Ekeler. His role is secure, and it's a weak running back room behind him, but long term, it's tough. He's getting up there in age. What are you expecting for his dynasty outlook, and what would you do with him if you're not on a contending team?
Yeah, I think you hit on it. The issue with his contract is really the market, much more than him, right? We got Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley unable to come to kind of franchise tag agreements going right up to the deadlines. Josh Jacobs led the league in rushing last year. Saquon Barkley had a really good year. Those guys can't get paid, right? They can't get paid above kind of the tender. So, he's very criminally underpaid. He's making like $6.5 million or something like that.
Yeah, $6.5 million, which is insane.
I
just mentioned Mike Williams' cap hit is going to be $32 million next year. Austin Ekeler is right now in the last year of his contract, $9 million.
Yeah, so I think his volume has really been a product of the fact that they can't find they've never been able to successfully find anyone to get, to take the load off of him, right? Josh Kelly's done nothing. Isaiah Spiller did nothing, back and back and back. They just never found kind of that second wheel guy to take the pressure off him. So I think it's pretty unlikely that he comes back. Obviously, it was pretty acrimonious this offseason with him kind of looking for a new contract. And obviously, Chargers weren't going to trade him because they weren't going to get anything for him. So I expect him to be somewhere else, and that somewhere else probably won't have the situation that he has right now. Almost by default won't be as good on offense, and he's probably going to have some competition for touches. So, yeah, he's a declining asset in Dynasty, let's put it that way. But someone who very much could lead you to a championship this year.
So to answer Kyle's question right now in the chat about how many more seasons would Ekeler realistically play like a top 5 running back, sounds like you're saying this is the last one.
Probably, yeah. I don't expect him wherever he goes to get the volume it would take to be a top 5 back.
Is it possible he could? Is he eligible for the? Can they franchise tag him? They can't, right? Can't franchise.
I think they could, but I don't think they would.
Okay. I wanted to throw that outlook out there. Either way, yeah, he's on an expiring deal. He turns 29 years old, and while he does have a bit of a unique route to the NFL of being a UDFA and having a much lesser workload for the early part of his career, 29 years old is still 29 years old in running back, which means he's 40 years old, and people aren't paying 40-year-old players unless they're Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. So, yeah, and it's tough for somebody that we're calling a top 5 running back for redraft production this year to then compare what you were saying of somebody who could be competing for touches somewhere else next year. A guy who's fighting for a role versus a guy who is locked into a top 5 fantasy role. So it's tough. And, he's one of those guys that's scary in Dynasty because if he gets hurt, he has one serious injury. That's it. That's it. He's not going to get a good enough contract, and that's a big issue. That's something I would be really worried about. And, when he gets as many touches as he does because of how centralized that rushing game is, because of how bad Josh Kelly, and that's how bad it is. It's those two and Larry Roundtree. It's so bad. Yeah. But yeah, that's it. It's a tough one for what Austin Ekeler can do. We're not going to just say he's going to get hurt, but that outcome is out there, and the impact of it is much more serious for someone like Ekeler than compared to other people. I want to stay on the charge with one other person, but just to touch on here. Kyle also saying Henry's also 29. Does he have one season left in him as well?
We've touched on this before when we talked about Tennessee. I am riding Derrick Henry until the wheels fall off. Right? He's been done it for 7 years. We've expected this to happen like each of the last 5. Right? He's kind of blown past the curse of 300 touches. Other than a couple of years ago when he had that foot injury, he's remained healthy and played every down. So yeah, I don't care with Derrick Henry. I'm riding him all the way until he's done. You're never going to get the trade value out of him that he's going to give to your team. So on a team that's not just kind of selling out or productive struggle, whatever. Yeah, I'm active. I'm just riding him until the wheels fall off.
Last Charger, or the last couple Chargers we got to talk about here. Obviously, talk about them taking a jump. It's coming with Justin Herbert. So somebody that's going in that mid to high end QB range for Dynasty, and Superflex is obviously a top 5, top 6 quarterback. Or top 6 pick overall, I'm saying. What are you expecting for Justin Herbert in terms of fantasy? Because I think we're all expecting him to get his long-term deal in the next month. He'll be a Charger for the future. We know what his receiving room is right now, what it'll probably look like next year. But what does that actually translate to? Because it's really, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like we have not gotten nearly the Justin Herbert that we talk about him being. And we haven't seen a close to what Justin Herbert could be.
Yeah, you talked about the offensive coordinator change from Joe Lombardi to Kellen Moore earlier. And I think this is really going to help Justin Herbert because, we see what he does. He throws just a supremely awesome deep ball, right? He's really good at it. His touch, his accuracy is just fantastic. And this is going to be accentuated under this offensive coordinator much more than it was under Joe Lombardi, who was kind of reining him in a little bit. So I think if there's one quarterback that I could see making the leap into the kind of Mahomes, Allen, Hurts top tier, it's Justin Herbert.
Yeah, I think it's very possible. I mean, you look at Dak Prescott last year with Kellen Moore, despite Kellen Moore's offense taking a bit of a dip as Mike McCarthy stuck his grubby little hands in there. Dak Prescott was 10th in or 17th in air yards. It was again a much lower passing offense, but in terms of efficiency, he still was in the top half for yards per attempt, top 10 in air yards per attempt. The Cowboys were trying to throw deep, but you had an injured Mike Gallup coming off a serious injury. They added Brandon Cooks to add to that. Again, this isn't a Cowboys thing, but I'm bringing it up to show what the Cowboys wanted to do last year with Kellen
And he did all that with a broken thumb, too.
And with a broken thumb. Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because that is a important part of the quarterback is the thumb. according to my sources. Last person we want to maybe talk about, Gerald Everett. Any interest left there? I've seen some people try to bring him back to life. I'm pretty much out, but what about you?
He belongs in that tier of just replaceable cyclical tight ends, right? He's take it or leave it. And he's after that top 6 or 7, any of those guys are basically the same. You're just kind of hoping for a touchdown, in any given week. He belongs in that group.
Yep. So tight end, top tight end in Dynasty right here. You heard it here first. Gerald Everett. Anyway, let's jump into our next team here. That sums up the Los Angeles Chargers. We're going to be talking about the Baltimore Ravens here. They settled up with Lamar Jackson. That was the biggest question mark they had this offseason. They got the extension done. Todd Monken's coming in as the offensive coordinator. They added Odell Beckham Jr. They drafted Zay Flowers. They still got Mark Andrews and probably still have Rashad Bateman. This offense is ready to go. J.K. Dobbins, 2 years removed from the serious ACL, LCL, PCL, hamstring tear. The Ravens are ready, Joel. But what does that look like for their passing game? Because I think that's the biggest thing that people want to know.
Yeah, I think this offense looks really similar to the old offense. They just move faster, right? They're not going to be as run-heavy as Greg Roman was, but I still think they're going to be a fairly run-heavy team. And I think you talked about those receivers. There's nobody I'm interested in that group. So I still think it's going to run through Mark Andrews, maybe Isaiah Likely as well. Monken used kind of both tight ends, Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, pretty heavily at Georgia last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if Likely is kind of a usable tight end in that Gerald Everett tier, just because I think they will run quite a few two tight end sets.
And I'm glad you brought up tight ends and Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, because that's exactly who Kelly Singh focused on in her Look Inside piece, which is on, again, clubfantasyffl.com. Be sure to check out all these pieces because they are incredibly detailed, well-researched, and amazing to check out. But that's exactly what she was talking about. Todd Monken has a very high affinity for using two tight end sets, what we saw in Georgia last year. And granted, he had Brock Bowers, but granted now he has Mark Andrews. So we're expecting good things from this tight end room. Isaiah Likely was incredibly impressive last year. I'm a little bit more hesitant on saying Isaiah Likely is going to be fantasy relevant without a Mark Andrews injury, just because when's the last time we really saw a two tight end set actually result in fantasy production for someone else? Would be like the Patriots 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I'm not saying he's going to be Darren Waller or George Kittle or anything like that, but I think he could be in that tier, like Gerald Everett, where of guys you can just reasonably hope for a touchdown every week.
And relatively, one of the only tight ends, if not the only tight end, that is a handcuff, somebody that you can actually play if Mark Andrews went down with confidence. Because last year as a rookie, we saw he was excellent. Again, with backup quarterback play at times, he was spectacular. I was really impressed with Isaiah Likely. But Mark Andrews, the note I have down for him, when is it too early to take him? Because I think we're both. I assume we're both expecting big things from Mark Andrews, a top 2 type of season yet again, coming off a slightly down year. But would you rather have Travis Kelce in the mid to early first? Or would you rather have Mark Andrews in the mid to late second?
That answer's always always going to be Kelce, but yeah, I'd still be happy to have Andrews at that point either way.
What if I drop it to the third round, early third?
For Andrews?
For Andrews.
It's still Kelce, but I'm very happy to have Andrews even in the second. So
okay, what if I take away Kelce's hands and feet? What if I
if you make him play with handcuffs?
Yeah, he has to play with handcuffs, and whenever he catches the ball, he has to do the do-si-do before he starts running. That's
10 push-ups.
Yeah, 10 push-ups. Okay, so at that point, will you take Mark Andrews?
At that point, I would probably take Andrews.
Okay, that's really what this show is about, is breaking down the hard questions.
That's the deep insight you're not getting anywhere else.
That's the deep insight you don't get with other shows. But the tight ends are going to be excellent this year. Mark Andrews is going to be great as always. Isaiah Likely will have his moments and will be an amazing handcuff. But the receiver room, you're saying you're not interested in any. Colic brings up in the chat here about Zay Flowers might emerging as the clear wide receiver 1 by midseason. That's what I think is going to happen. I do think Zay Flowers is leading this room by the end of the year. I'm as out on Bateman as I think the Ravens are. Signing Odell for $18 million, which reeks of desperation, tells me that they are not confident in Rashad Bateman anymore. drafting Zay Flowers in the first round tells me they are not confident in Rashad Bateman right now. And sure, if he's healthy and is what they wanted him to be, great. But the Ravens are viewing that as a bonus, and I'm viewing it as a bonus as well. So I'm not counting on Bateman. I'm not counting on Odell being himself after, 2-3 years off and 2-3 years older and another serious injury recovery later into his 30s. So we've seen Lamar Jackson support a wide receiver with Mark Andrews. One wide receiver has been relevant. We've seen Nelson Aguilar have relevant games. We've seen Sammy Watkins have a bit of a tear. Zay Flowers is actually a good player, a first-round talent for a reason. I do think he's going to be a genuinely fantasy-relevant player this year. I do think it'll be spotty because I agree I don't think they're going to be all of a sudden a top 15 passing team, but I do expect them to pass it more, and I think that'll be a good thing for Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I would take Zay Flowers in that offense just by default because I have no interest in Bateman or Odell Beckham. I don't think Beckham's going to do anything at all. If you look at Flowers, he's small, but he's pretty similar stylistically and size-wise to Hollywood Brown, right? They got about the same draft capital. And Hollywood Brown succeeded with Lamar Jackson. So I don't think he's going to be, I don't think he steps into that kind of top 25 wide receiver tier, but yeah, I think he's the best receiver on this team by default. So yeah, I definitely of the three, I definitely like him the most.
And we appreciate these comments from Kyle as well. And I want to emphasize to all of our viewers listening live right now, be sure to keep dropping in these questions. We're going to be doing trade reviews later. So if you guys have dynasty trades you're considering or trades that you've seen done and you want our thoughts, feel free to toss them in the chat. We're loving the interaction today. But yeah, that kind of sums up the receiver room of that Ravens offense to an extent. I think we're both in on Zay Flowers to an extent and kind of out on the rest. But running back, that is interesting because some people are really planting their flag on a RB1 season from J.K. Dobbins. And I do love me some J.K. Dobbins. But what about you, Joel? Somebody that is on a contract year as well, coming off injuries before a impressive rookie season.
Yeah, I think you hit on it earlier when you said he's the year removed from the injury. I've talked before. I generally fade guys coming, in that first season off the ACL injury. If you look at his numbers last year when he came back kind of full time, he kind of came back for a little bit, then got hurt again, missed a bunch of games. Then came back for 6-7 games at the end of the year. He averaged 7 yards a carry at the end of the year. Now, most of that was with Tyler Huntley. But still, you don't average 7 yards a carry by accident, right? So I like J.K. Dobbins a lot as a player. Glad it seems to be 100% back after the injury. I think he's in for a big year.
I'm so in. I'm dangerously in. I'm dangerously in. J.K. Dobbins. It's incorrect to say this now, so this isn't a pat on the back. But I had him ahead of Jonathan Taylor as in the prospect group when they were coming out together. I know it's not a flex because that was wrong, but still, that's how high I was on J.K. Dobbins, and I was that for exactly what we saw at the end of last year. He was 4th in true yards per carry, 9th in yards per touch, 2nd in juke rate, 3rd in breakaway runs. And again, this is a year off of one of the worst knee injuries we've had in the last 5 years because he tore every single possible part of his body. And those numbers coming from Player Profiler, by the way, big fan of Player Profiler, has some amazing analytics for you guys to check out. But it goes to show how good he was last year. And really the biggest hindrance to him taking that top 10 leap or that top 12 leap is really the passing work because he's never been involved in the passing game. He might be able to do it. I think he can do it, but Lamar Jackson hasn't looked at the running back in his entire career. Yep. So is that something you're a little bit worried about, or do you think touchdowns can offset that?
Yeah, I'm not worried about it too much. I mean, we've seen Nick Chubb go, every year without passing volume and be top 5, top 10 running back. Kenneth Walker did it last year in Seattle. So, yeah, it's obviously nice to have those pass attempts, but it's not going to happen in this offense, and that's okay, right? Because I think this is going to be a good enough offense, and he's going to be a big enough. Like the offense to me is Andrews and Dobbins and Lamar, so he's going to be a big chunk of that. He should get all the goal line. And people are talking about Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards is nothing. This is J.K. Dobbins' backfield. So, yeah, I'm not worried about that.
It's a shame about Gus Edwards because I liked him. I didn't think he was spectacular or anything, but he tore his ACL, a day or the same day as Dobbins did.
Within like the same week, wasn't it? It was really close.
It was back to back, so people had less than 24 hours to do a victory lap, and it wasn't great. So yeah, I do think the time has kind of passed him by. He does control that backfield. I'm with you. We've seen a running back with no passing volume be a RB1 plenty of times, and we've seen it in this team, with Mark Ingram a few years ago, because he was able to score touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins can do that too, I think, and he could rip off runs that no Ravens back has been able to do since Ray Rice, or maybe prime Justin Forsett or something. And even he wasn't ripping those off. So, yeah, we're both very in on J.K. Dobbins, which is good. I'm glad we're agreeing right now. But let's talk about Lamar Jackson, Joel. So, got his extension, Dynasty darling, but kind of dealing with the injuries last few years. People are expecting them to pass a little bit more, partially due to them trying to keep him healthy. What are you expecting? Do you think you're actually going to see a hit to the rushing volume, or do you think it just goes up in efficiency?
I don't think this rushing volume is going to change much at all. It's who he is, right? This isn't like a Josh Allen situation where you can just say, okay, we need to dial it back with him a little bit, and maybe we'll give Damian Harris some goal line carries. It's who he is. It's how he's successful. So no, I don't think you can, or they will even try to dial back his rushing attempts.
I do think we're going to see a dialed back rushing attempt in terms of the plays that are called. We're going to see less designed runs, the QB draws that are going to be sending them up the middle. I do think we're going to see less of that. But the man still scrambles because the man is still good at what he does. And they're still going to call the occasional play because they can't lose that element of their offense. It's so important to not only what they do, but what the offensive line does. They have carefully pieced together offensive linemen that fit a mobile quarterback over the years. And it's because they're able to have enough speed that not every lineman does to swing out and get in front of their players. So it's a big part of how they run this offense. And while they might do it in a safer way or they might do it a slightly bit less, Lamar's still going to run at a much higher rate than every other quarterback in fantasy, and that's going to make the difference at the end of the day. Question here from Lewis Hall saying, love the show, love having you here. Do you feel that likely has much value in Dynasty given OBJ, Rashad Bateman's injuries history, and how he performed in lieu of Andrews being injured last year? Do you think he is a buy in Dynasty? Joel, I'll let you take it.
At his cost, absolutely. I'm a big fan. Like you said, I think we both liked what he did last year, especially when Andrews was out. That was a big game. That was like Monday night against the Saints when Andrews missed, and he had a couple touchdowns. I'll go hot takey a little bit. I think this could be the best tight end pairing since the ill-fated Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez pairing in New England, just because how much this offense uses the tight ends and how good both these guys are. So, yeah, at his cost, I think he's definitely a buy.
You're forgetting about Kobe Fleener and Dwayne Allen in Indianapolis. That was my duo, the big blocker and the drop hands. Oh, my God, the drops that Kobe Fleener. But
if I'm forgetting, it's intentional.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially you. Yeah, okay. But, yeah, Isaiah Likely, the biggest thing with tight ends in Dynasty to me is if you can identify talent, that's 95% of the issue. Eventually, he'll get on the field because he's too good of a player. Maybe it requires a change of situation. Maybe it requires an injury, God forbid, or just something happens where they line him up at receiver more because good players find a way. No matter what you think about Evan Ingram, he has some talent that just, we saw it in the rookie year and it just took some time to get out. And it took a scene change. It took a coaching situation that emphasized the tight end a little bit more. And eventually he got there. And Isaiah Likely has the ceiling to be better than Evan Ingram because he's just a lot better. Also throwing in there, what about Paul Richard? Is that I don't know a Paul Richard tight end. I know a Paul Richardson. Joel, can you help me out here?
I'm not familiar with him either. I don't remember.
Okay, well, Austin's throwing a wrench into the tight end room of Dynasty. And honestly, that's how the tight ends like to keep us on our toes anyway. So that's
but we hit on it earlier. Like if you're not inside that, that top 6 or 7 when you get to like Kittle, Waller, Goddard, once you're past that, if you get a touchdown any given week, you're a top 10 tight end, right? So I think that's within range for Likely that he can be, what's the difference between Likely and David Njoku at that point, right? So I think he's definitely a buy, especially given what he costs right now.
Yeah, see, now I know what Austin was saying. He was saying Paul Ricard, not Richard. And now I feel better because I know Paul Ricard. And no, I'm not worried about the fullback. I'm not worried about him at all. I might have been worried about Baltimore's use check, but he's no longer there. So, yeah, we're talking about fullbacks and tight ends. This show is clearly going exactly how we wanted it to. But yeah, to sum it up, I like Isaiah Likely. Yeah, because Isaiah Likely is one of those few guys, like we were just saying, if he gets a starting role, he will be a top 6 guy. He doesn't need to be a touchdown or enough. And those guys are so rare to find. So if you could take one, stash it away, if your taxi squad allows an extra year, 100%. I'd love to have him on my rosters at the back end, and especially if I had Andrews, because I secure a very good role with 2 very good players. So, yeah, that's the Baltimore Ravens right there. We're very excited to see what happens. Where do you think they're going to finish in the division? I didn't have this scripted or anything, but where do you think? Because the Ravens are – I could see them. I have them second, but there could be a really good team this year. I wouldn't be surprised.
I kind of think Cleveland is like the surprise team in that division. So I like every team in that division. Like I legitimately think this could be like the best division in football. So I
hate the Steelers. I don't know.
Like you could be like the 4th team in this division and still be the top.
Still have a winning record, man.
Top 60% of the AFC. Yeah, between that, the AFC North and the AFC East are probably the 2 toughest divisions in the league by far.
How about the AFC West? That's what I want to. I have the AFC West as one of the hardest divisions out there. But hey, that
division is Kansas City and LA and nothing else.
Oh, come on, Denver will be a little better.
Denver is not there. No, next year
will be a little bit better. Either way, we got one more team to jump into here. This team's not in the AFC at all, but it's in the NFC. The NFC North with the Minnesota Vikings. So I took a stab at this one this time. Of this article that came out was moi. So be sure to check out my piece on Jordan Addison, rookie wide receiver out of USC/Pittsburgh, because I think he's going to have a very good season, and he's going too late in drafts right now, and I'll tell you why. He's going right now, wide receiver 39 in redrafts. Dynasty, it's obviously a bit higher, but he's still going outside the wide receiver 2 range. And sure, it is very true that he will never be the wide receiver 1 on his team. But last year we had 5 duos that were inside the top 24. And if it was, I believe it would have jumped to 6 duos if Zay Jones had another 2 points. So, yeah, I'm in on what Jordan Addison will be in this offense. We saw what Kevin O'Connell instituted last year. It was such a pass-friendly system that worked really well with Kirk Cousins' downfield ability. And 3 wide receiver sets were shot up to 67%. It was a top 5 number in the league. They were top 5 in passing attempts. And this defense is still pretty dang bad. I'm not expecting much changes here going into the second year of Kevin O'Connell with still Kirk Cousins under center and now a much better receiver in Jordan Addison than Adam Thielen. So I think he's going to finish just outside the wide receiver 2, around that wide receiver 27 range. But for me, that's a buy, because if he puts that up, he's going to be worth a lot more this time next year. What are your thoughts on Jordan Addison?
All right, I'll throw a little bit of cold water on it.
Oh, please. Roll the bucket. I need it. I'm steaming hot.
I love the player. Like, I've been a big fan. We've joked a few times that he's the greatest receiver of all time because he made Kenny Pickett a first-round pick by himself. My concern right now is the injury, right? He's missed basically their entire offseason program with an undisclosed injury. That kind of scares the hell out of me. If he's not back, like, for week 1 of training camp, I'm going to get really, really nervous, because he needs that time to pick up the offense, to develop chemistry with Cousins. We've seen this happen with rookie receivers, right? Christian Watson last year had to have that knee surgery, missed, the beginning of training camp, and it took him, basically more than half the season to get himself healthy and get, kind of rapport going with Aaron Rodgers and start producing. We saw 2 years ago with Elijah Moore, where I think he had a concussion in training camp, and it took him to like week 8 to really start making a difference. So I'm kind of afraid that he becomes one of those rookie tight ends who really does nothing for the first half of the year and then kind of turns it on. And it's about the injury more than anything, right? I like I said, I love the player, and I love the situation. It's just the injury is making me really nervous.
Can I ease your concerns with the reports that are out saying that it's a minor injury? They're expecting to be full go by training camp. We'll obviously know that within the next couple of weeks if he is full go. But let's say he is. Let's say he is healthy. Are you on board or are you off board? Let's say he's healthy for as we would hope or expect.
If he's out there on day one of training camp going full speed, then yeah, I'm back on board.
Okay, so there we go. And I had him as my wide receiver 2 in this class. I was very, very high on Jordan Addison. I think he's excellent. I think he's going to be a very good piece for the Vikings, who have yet again hit it out of the park with their wide receiver pick in the first round. So let's talk about other people on this team other than Jordan Addison, because there is a certain guy named Justin Jefferson who is, sources say, a pretty good wide receiver out of LSU. Pretty good player. So dynasty-wise, really the only question I think we need to ask is there a price that's too high?
Not in single QB, no.
Let's go. So let's go to Superflex, because I think we're both in greens. These are 101 in one QB formats. But go to Superflex. How many quarterbacks are you willing to take above them? Or which one? It's a tough thing to ask off the top of your head. I know. Let's go together. We'll go Mahomes.
Yes. Mahomes is ahead of him. Yes.
Let's go. I'm blanking. Justin Herbert.
Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, Herbert, Jackson, Burrow, Lawrence, Watson. I would take Watson ahead of him. I think that's probably the line. I would take Jefferson ahead of Dak. I would take him ahead of Anthony Richardson. So I think Watson's the line.
Okay, interesting. I would probably take him ahead of Deshaun Watson.
I would take Fields ahead of him.
I would take Fields ahead of him as well. But yeah, so that's about the line. So that probably puts him around that. It's still inside the top 10.
I would have him at 10 in the Superflex.
Yeah, so we are still everyone's high on Justin Jefferson. We don't need to spend too much time on the perennial wide receiver 1 because he is a star. So let's talk about the other guys. Let's go about that running back room, because that's the biggest question out there. We have already a question in the chat about Alexander Mattison in a trade. We're going to touch on that in our do better trade segments, which we'll jump right into right after we talk about the Minnesota Vikings. So let's talk Mattison. Man, we have talked about it obviously a few times because of the news that has been breaking, the projections we're throwing out there. But are you expecting him to get the Dalvin Cook type of treatment, the Dalvin Cook workload? Is that going to happen for Alexander Mattison?
So here's the wild thing is that I saw a report that the Vikings have like a $7 million offer for Dalvin Cook. Did you see that?
Wait, no, I did not see that.
This came out of maybe a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember.
The Vikings
I don't remember where it came from. Yeah, it was wild. It's like that's kind of the last place I expected him to go is to go back to Minnesota. But so anyway, if that's true and Cook goes back to Minnesota, then that's the death knell for Alexander Mattison. I'm still nervous about that workload. Like there's a ton of guys out there that could be signed, like Kareem Hunt, Zeke Elliott, Leonard Fournette. Obviously, Cook's still out there. So there's a ton of potential competition out there for a guy, who's never been anything other than a second banana, right? He's never carried a starter's workload for more than a game or two. So I'm very nervous about the workload. Like we've talked about previously, the list of players who've done well after playing out their rookie contract is very small. It's basically Michael Turner. So I'm still more nervous about Mattison than I am in on him.
Yeah, I'm still tentatively optimistic because I still expect this offense to be able to move the ball well, and I'm not worried about the running back room at the moment. Now, I looked up that news report you just shared because that is very interesting. That report's coming from Boomer Esiason, from a source that he has that he to return to the Vikings. Well, let's just say right now, what percent chance do you think that happens? I'm going to say like 30, 25 maybe.
I would say probably 5. I don't know how reliable a source Boomer Esiason is, but
sure. I mean,
it's out there, so I was kind of blown away by it. Like I said, 90% of that stuff is just made up nonsense that somebody's got an agenda, whether it's the agent or the player or the team, whatever. But I don't think it's very likely, but it's out there, so I guess it's possible.
I'm going to very quickly, when you say something, as soon as it comes in your mouth, you're like, what are you talking about? I'm going to jot that down to 10% because the 25 is way too high. Because of everything you're saying, it's a slow news cycle right now, so it could just be something getting thrown out there. And on the other side, you have the very real world that he's not receiving good contract offers. And like you said, his agent is feeding out a number like $7 million to get the ball rolling with some other teams. So, yeah, my knee jerk was a little bit too jerky in a way. But let's assume Mattison is the guy. I'm still relatively in because I do think he'll have the workload. I don't think that Ty Chandler or Dwayne McBride or Keenan Allen is good enough to be taking away touches from Alexander Mattison. Now, I do have questions about what he can do as a receiver, and Dalvin Cook was still good as a receiver, and I don't know if Ty Chandler eats into that a little bit more. But in terms of what he does on the ground, I think he's still going to be a pretty safe RB2. Around that 7 to 8, the touchdowns will determine how high his upside really is. I think he's going to be finishing around that RB17 type of range this year. And he is in a contract year for a team that is seemingly ready to flip the page, moving on from Kirk Cousins in 2024, probably drafting a running back along with it. So the future for Mattison, and that is dynasty to an extent, is playing that long game. It's a little bit dicey. So how do you? I guess if you're low on him this year relatively to the cost, you're trading him and getting out as much as you can, I imagine.
Yes, as much as possible.
Yeah. So
the problem is there's not a huge market for him right now, so it's tough to get value for him.
Yeah,
it's very possible that he's just more valuable as a point scorer than he is as a trade commodity.
Yeah, at least until the season starts. And I think that's a big thing to remind people as well, is that the trade market right now for Dynasty, it exists because all of our players in rosy conditions were expecting everything to work out. And then September rolls around, then October rolls around. You have injuries, you have disappointments, you have busts, you have one injury that isn't even on your team that impacts the rest of your team. And then all of a sudden somebody that happened to stay healthy but is scoring points, maybe is a dicey situation down the road, you want an Alexander Mattison on your side, and his price goes up if he's not one of the people that get hurt. So, and he's not one of the people that disappoint. So if I think he's somebody that I'd be closer to holding than selling right now for everything you just said. I think people are a little bit too scared to pay what I would want from him. And ultimately, I do think he's going to be pretty solid for fantasy football is the word I would use to describe him. But that's the running back room. We talked about the receivers, except for KJ Osborne. I know we talked a little bit about KJ Osborne being an interesting guy. Any KJ?
Osborne, if my concerns about Addison come to fruition and Addison can't get on the field early, then yeah, I like Osborne quite a bit. If Addison, like we said, if he's there on day one, full speed at training camp, and we expect him to kind of take the reins as wide receiver too, then yeah, then when you figure Hockenson's in there too, there's just not enough volume to go around for Osborne to make a difference.
Yeah, that's my thoughts as well. But we'll talk about the tight end you just mentioned right there, TJ Hockenson, coming over last season, halfway through, and just dominated the second half of the season. I believe he averaged over 8 targets per game. Irv Smith was hurt last year, is no longer on this team anyway. He was the tight end 2 for fantasy football last year with TJ Hockenson. So are you expecting a repeat? Are we expecting an improvement because of the red zone opportunity that might be available? What are you looking for with TJ Hockenson, who's just now hitting his prime?
Yeah, he kind of turned into the guy we always expected him to be when he got that draft capital from Detroit, and just for some reason they just never used him, never focused on him the way that Minnesota did. Don't know how sustainable that is, especially if Addison, like we said, if he's ready to go. I don't think last year Adam Thielen was basically a ghost of himself. So he was pass target number 2, just by default when he got there. So if Addison's there and ready to go and ready to take that volume, then I think Hockenson's dips quite a bit. Still, he's still a valuable tight end. He's still in that kind of top tier, but I'm not sure how sustainable that target volume level is.
Yeah, and I think the real thing, because I'm with you, I think the targets will drop, but the biggest thing to look for with TJ Hockenson is what happens in the red zone. Because what Adam Thielen did last year wasn't impressive to our eye from the sideline. What he did do was have the second most red zone receptions in the NFL. He had 15, only behind Justin Jefferson, who had 16. So they threw to him in the red zone. And while that didn't result for fantasy for us, those targets and those were receptions, those looks are up for grabs. And I don't think Jordan Addison is going to be scoring many touchdowns because that's just not his play style. If he gets one deep, good for him, but he's not going to be bodying someone in a press coverage in the red zone or something like that. He doesn't have the size for that. So that's where TJ Hockenson, the big boy, will have obviously a much better role. So I think he can make up for the lack of targets with touchdowns. And I know that's always a bit of a tough get when you're trading targets for touchdowns because touchdowns are a lot harder to predict. But it's a very pass-heavy offense. I think will still be a very pass-focused offense. It's going to be focused through Hockenson, Jefferson, and maybe Addison. But I think Addison's going to have to earn his targets, whereas Hockenson will be scripted those because he's just going to be.
And like you said, it's a terrible defense, so they're going to be in shootout city most weeks. So there's going to be a lot of pass volume.
Yeah, and a competitive division as well. Minnesota won't be throwing in the towel even if they throw in last, even if they end up in last, because I think it is going to be a tight race all year long between Detroit, Chicago, and Green Bay. I'm with your guys, by the way. I do think Green Bay takes NFC North, but that's for another prediction show. That's for another type of prediction show. Any other Vikings you want to touch on? Or do you want Kirk Cousins? I guess we didn't really talk about as the perennially undervalued guy. We spent 20 seconds on Kirk Cousins. I'm expecting another great season. Next year, I don't know who he plays with, but it's not going to be with the Vikings, and that really makes it a very scary situation for Superflex dynasties.
Yeah, I think he's Kirk Cousins this year. I think he's Jimmy Garoppolo next year.
Yeah. I mean, right now he's in a perfect situation. Wherever he goes next year, he will have less passing attempts just because he's going from a top 5 unit to wherever he goes. It will. You have to be only 4 teams ahead of it. One of them's going. Those teams that are passing more tend to be because they have great quarterbacks. So
if he's even the starter where he goes next year,
if he's the starter, which he should be because he's still a good quarterback, let's jump into the do better trades of the week, trades that we have seen and wanted to talk about in our leagues, and also a couple we saw in the chat. Again, from Collie, he traded away ETN, a 4th, and Deontay Johnson for an early 2nd, Alexander Mattison, Treylon Burks, and Eric Gray in a Dynasty Superflex PPR. Which side won the trade?
Man, that's pretty even, right?
Even trade. I do like it.
I think that's really close. I think that's a fair deal on both sides. I would rather have Burks than Deontay. I would rather have ETN than Mattison. 4th and the 2nd. I don't know that make a whole lot of deals. So yeah, I think that's a pretty fair trade.
Early 2nd in a Superflex is a pretty valuable pick. It's my gut. It's definitely even trade because my gut initially said ETN, and now I'm looking at the other side like, ooh, I don't know.
If I had to pick a side, I would take the side with the 2nd. But yeah, I think it's pretty close.
I think the safer side is the side with the 2nd. I'm still going to take the ETN side with the narrative of I think ETN is the best player in the trade, and that is a side swinger for me. And I'm higher on Deontay Johnson than you are because I believe he's going to have a very good year.
We're both high on Deontay Johnson.
Yeah. So
you're probably higher because you're the Pittsburgh guy, but I like him quite a bit.
I swear on my life, I'm the most self-hating Pittsburgh fan. Well, I am so anti-Kenny Pickett. You know this. All right. I don't team hunt right there. Anyway, another one from Colic here. Also was a trade with AR-15. That's Anthony Richardson, Miles Sanders, Travis Etienne, and Deontay Johnson for Murray. I'm guessing that's Kyler. Jahmyr Gibbs, Montgomery at 20. Oh my goodness, 24 first, wow. 24 second, 25 second. So
that's the Kyler side by a mile.
Yeah, it's not even close. The hate for Kyler has swung way too far in Superflex Cities. My goodness,
way too far. Wow, that's a lot.
It's funny because we've spent the last few weeks on this show talking about Jahmyr Gibbs trades that have swung way too far in the Jahmyr Gibbs direction. And now we see that. Now, I know you plugged in a couple trades here with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes being traded for Justin Herbert, Christian Watson, the 210 and 304. Give me Mahomes. And honestly, it's not it is close, but I'm going to take Mahomes. I'm going to take Mahomes.
Okay, so I traded Patrick Mahomes for this package.
Of course you did. You're higher on Watson than I am.
I'm also higher on Herbert. I'm pretty high on Herbert, as we discussed. So this is if I was doing this from the other side, I wouldn't do it, right? I wouldn't trade a valuable asset in, like, the picks are nothing. The picks are lottery tickets. They're meaningless in this deal. It's Herbert and Watson for Mahomes. So I would not trade a valuable piece like Watson to go from Herbert to Mahomes. And it's the any given Sunday, any given season thing, right?
I agree.
any given Sunday, you could see Justin Herbert being as good or better than Mahomes. Any given season, you could see him being as good or better than Mahomes. Overall, kind of long term, I expect Mahomes to be the better player, but it's close. It's like 1 tier difference. So give me the extra player. And I think a valuable player like Christian Watson has kind of that wide receiver 2 upside. If this was like, Robert Woods or something like that, there's no way I do this, obviously. Yeah. Or even like Tyler Lockett. That's not enough of a kicker. But Christian Watson has that major upside to where this could be a clear win for the Herbert side. You've got to have that kind of potential to make this deal happen.
You've talked me into it. I am a believer enough in Herbert to say that it's marginal. And even if I'm right about Watson and he doesn't evolve into what I would want him to be, it's worth the lottery ticket for the small jump. And you got me when I was on the other side saying, I would never send that, even though I would want the Mahomes side. So I'm flipping back. We got another Mahomes trade coming in here. Garrett Wilson and Jalen Waddle for Patrick Mahomes. A rare trade for Mahomes that doesn't involve a quarterback in a Superflex league. And it is hard for me not to say the wide receiver side, but oh man, talk me through it, Bees. I know you put this in.
So I got Mahomes in this one because I had to maintain my Patrick Mahomes quota. This was actually offered to me. I didn't go out and this just came straight up. Just emailed Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle for Mahomes, and I think you hit on it. If I'm getting Mahomes and not having to give up a quarterback, it's almost automatically I'm taking Mahomes.
That's the answer. You're trading 2 second-round startup picks for the 101 in a startup. That's something that's worth it for me. And
so now here's the thing that kind of complicates this deal. Please. In this league, I also have Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love. So now I have plus Ryan Tannehill. So I've legitimately got 5 startable Superflex quarterbacks. So I'm probably going to have to go out and I'll probably move Trevor Lawrence. I don't want to move Mahomes or Hurts. I want to keep that room together. So
I don't think you'll have a problem moving Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I don't know that Jordan Love has the trade value to make it worthwhile. I'd rather keep him as kind of my third. So I'm probably gonna have to go out and move Lawrence just because my receiver room takes a pretty big hit with this deal. But yeah, like I said, if I'm getting Patrick Mahomes and don't have to give up a quarterback, it's almost automatic.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So Lewis Hall, so throwing one more in the chat here. Joel saying that no price is too much for Jefferson, which got him curious. We haven't talked about Jefferson trades on the last few shows, interestingly enough.
Well, no price is too much one for one, right? You get a package that's worth Jefferson, obviously, but yeah.
But he paid Jimmy G, Michael Pittman, Kadarius Toney, Rashad White, and a 2024 first, second, and third, 25 third, all for Chase and Superflex PPR tight end premium. Is it too much? No, sir. You did incredibly well.
Nope.
And you guys
not too much at all.
Yeah, I love that we if you were next to me, we would have just looked at each other. But we're on the same page. I didn't even have to ask you because we're both going to smash that trade for Jamar Chase. I'm very proud of
100% Chase.
Yeah, good deal there. I got one more trade I want to highlight here because this one's coming in from a personal friend of mine who wanted to hear your thoughts on this, Joel. So T. Higgins, Traylon Burks, 2023 second for Travis Etienne, Christian Watson, and Deontay Johnson. Ironically enough, we have two. We have 2 trades that are very similar here with the other one with Burks and Deontay and Etienne in it. Another one with Watson. So this one, though, putting it all together to round out the show here, T. Higgins, Traylon Burks, 23 second for that other side. What are your thoughts, Joel?
I'm going to go with the Etienne, Watson, Deontay side just because I think the other parts are pretty close. Like Watson and Burks are kind of right next to each other. Higgins and Etienne are about as valuable. Higgins is probably a little bit more valuable just because he's a wide receiver, but they're very close. Deontay for a 23 second, I think, is a big win. So that's going to tip the scales for that side for me.
Yep, I'm with you. And I'm high enough on Deontay Johnson. You're high enough on Christian Watson to make it a good pairing.
I'm high on Watson and Johnson. Yeah. So this is pretty easily Watson and Johnson. I think just from a pure value standpoint, I think it's the Watson Johnson side.
Yeah, he wanted me to bring it up partially because I have been beating the drum for Traylon Burks all year, and now all of a sudden the DeAndre Hopkins signing came in. He was a little bit worried. He's been trying to reevaluate the trade market, and I think a lot of people are in that same boat, so I wanted to bring it up on the show. But yeah, we're both going to take
one thing real quick. With the DeAndre Hopkins signing, I'm going to start pretty actively trying to make 90 cents on the dollar deals for Burks.
Oh, I've
think
already
if
sent one out.
people are afraid of that, I don't think that affects him in any way whatsoever. So if I can get a small discount on him, I'm buying.
I've already sent a first and some low-end tight end for, I think, Burks and Njoku. It's not done, but I'm hoping I can get that as a starting point, because I'm going out there and acquiring it. Something we always want to talk about on this show is that we're trying to back up our takes. We're not talking out there to ether. We're here to help you guys, and we're also backing what we believe. So definitely want to bring that up here. But that is our show. We really appreciate everyone sticking with us through this hour. And it's also been one of the more high-reviewed shows so far. I've been able to see that. So awesome having you guys out here. Although, actually, I missed one other trade you on the show, Doc. Joel, do you want to bring up your that? We
can do this one real quick. Yeah, we can hit on this one. This is
okay. This is a good one. This is something that's a thinker and that we should leave everyone thinking about.
Yeah. So this is.
Go for it.
Do you have it up, or we can?
I have it up.
Okay. So this is let's hit the background. This is a 16-team Superflex IDP. Okay. Start 8 offensive players. So, like, I have the Trevor Lawrence side. I was offered Mac Jones, Tony Pollard in the 5th for Lawrence, Charbonnet, and the 24 first. If you gave me all 5 pieces other than Trevor Lawrence in this deal, I wouldn't do it. Right? In a 16-team Superflex, Trevor Lawrence is unbelievable. Any elite quarterback is just massively valuable. This is an embarrassing offer. I didn't even like, normally if I get a trade offer, I'll at least say thanks for the offer or whatever. This was just a straight decline. This is garbage.
It's a good way to ruin your
worst trade I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, it's a good way to ruin that relationship you're building with your league mates by sending stuff like that. So we definitely want to bring that up to end it all on a laugh here, because we are on agreement of how crazy that trade is. So thank you all for tuning in here to the Dynasty After Party with Club Fantasy FFL. So you can follow me at Michael__Skull, and you follow Joel here at the Joel Wirth. And obviously, you can follow Club Fantasy at Club Fantasy FFL. All the stories and teams that we talked about today have articles written about them on clubfantasyffl.com. Amazing write-ups. I have one about Jordan Addison that we talked about. Be sure to check those out. Next week, we're talking about the Jaguars, the Giants, and Dallas, 3 teams that I think are very interesting for fantasy football that are all going to be very fantasy relevant all year long. So we're going to be talking about that next week. I won't be here, but Joel will be, and maybe a special guest too. So thank you guys for tuning in this week. Remember, Dynasty is like a disco ball, keeps on spinning year round. So join the club every Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern right here with Club Fantasy. Have a good night. Stay healthy.